Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tom's Comic Curios, where you'll usually hear about comics that you don't hear about anywhere else. Today, we're making an exception because I'm going to talk about a comic book which is quite a bit more famous, Sad Sack. I've had a few requests to show Sad Sack comics, to talk about the history of Sad Sack. I have a couple of friends who are interested in Sad Sack comics, so this video is for them and for anybody else that would like to hear about Sad Sack. Before I get started, no, actually, you know what? I'm just going to get started today, I think. Sad Sack was created in 1942. Now, I have Wikipedia open here just to make sure I get everything right. Yes, so Sad Sack debuted in 1942 in an armed services magazine called Yank. So this was in World War II, and it was created by George Baker, who I think was a private at the time he created. I'm not sure, but he definitely became a sergeant though, so Sergeant George Baker. Now, what I didn't know, surprisingly, before I made this video, is that he based the Sad Sack on an actual friend of his who was also in the Army, who had also worked on Yank magazine. I believe he was a photographer on Yank magazine. And he was also a private in the Army. I think he might have also become a sergeant, though. His name was Ben Schnall. I believe it's Schnall, his last name. Something like that. So the Sad Sack was actually based on a real person in the Army in World War II, Ben Schnall. Now, I was looking through a few old Yank magazines before I made this video to do some research. And there was a letter. I saw a letter in one of the issues in 1944 where an Army person said that they felt that the adventures of the Sad Sack in Yank encapsulated the experiences of the soldier better than anything else could, these cartoons. So he asked them to compile all of the Sad Sack cartoons that had been published up to that date from 1942 until 44 into a book that the soldiers could buy, and it would serve as a memento of their time in the Army. So that in World War II. So it was published as a book called The Sad Sack, and I believe it was published in 1944. It was, I think the original might have been a hardcover book. I used to have a copy of, well, there were two of them. There was one published in 44, and then there was a sequel, because that one was very popular. There was one published in 1946 called The New Sad Sack, which collected the Yank magazine cartoons as well. And I had a hardcover book of one of those. I believe it was the 46 one that I had. But I don't have it any longer. It featured an introduction by Sergeant George Baker, the guy who created Sad Sack and drew Sad Sack and wrote it. It was pretty neat. Eventually, in 1991, it was reprinted. At least one of them was reprinted. I don't know if it was the first hardcover book or the second one. And they might have been softcover, as well. But they were reprinted by the descendants of the Harveys, and the Harveys that were still alive, from Harvey Comics, because Sad Sack became a Harvey comic later. They were reprinted as the original Sad Sack, many of these early cartoons, through their company called Recollections, also known as Lauren Harvey. So there's only one issue of this, the original Sad Sack, number 1 here. You see it says the original George Baker cartoons. And it's pretty neat. It also includes the preface, the introduction by George Baker himself, written during in 1946. So there's, straight from 1946. Now, I believe that Mr. Baker worked as a Disney animator for a time, and if I remember correctly, he talks about that and what that was like in his introduction, which is interesting. And he talks about how the animators would try to put personality into the cartoons they did in different ways and how they would do that. Now, when Sad Sack was originally published and created by George Baker in Yank magazine, it was a pantomime strip, which means that it had no words. It was a lot different than the Harvey comics later on, or what they would become. So what you see here is like the physical. You see a soldier, the Sad Sack, getting a physical and what the experience is like. You see him getting his uniform. So they're all experiences of the soldier during the time, but told in a humorous way. The bayonet, he's learning to use the bayonet. He has to get a new shoelace for his shoe. Things like that. And they're really neat, And the whole book is like that. So, wordless pantomime strips detailing the experiences of the soldier in World War II in a humorous fashion. So, I definitely recommend this. If you want to seek out the original cartoons, you could try to get a copy of the books. There was another reprint of the books in, I believe, 1978. There was one in a softcover format. Published by Harvey, so you might be able to find a copy of that. I haven't seen one, but you can also look for a copy of this, the original Sad Sack, as well, to get a taste of what those original cartoons were like. So, at some point during the 1940s, after World War II, I believe it would have been after World War II. Let me check here. There was a newspaper strip. Okay, so that ran actually from May 5th, 1946 until 1958. The newspaper strip, I don't know too much about, but I think they were pantomime strips as well, because I believe I have seen samples of the newspaper strip on Sad Sack's Facebook group. So that was a lot like the original, the newspaper strip. It was pretty good. By the way, there was another comic called, which is more famous now, called Beetle Bailey by Mort Walker, which came after Sad Sack, and it was a lot like Sad Sack. So I don't know, some people might call it like an imitation Sad Sack strip, I don't know, but it did become even more popular in time. There were differences between the strips, but there were similarities as well. I never got into Beetle Bailey because I was always a big fan of Sad Sack. Sad Sack was my favorite comic book growing up, and yeah, I felt weird as a kid, like, even looking at Beetle Bailey, because Sad Sack was my thing, I thought Sad Sack was so cool, and I wanted to remain loyal to Sad Sack. So, anyway, in the late 1940s, Harvey Comics began a comic book version of Sad Sack. And this comic book ran for a very long time. The original run was from 1949 up to 1982, and there were 287 issues of the original Sad Sack. Eventually, Lauren Harvey, the Harvey descendants who retained the rights to the Sad Sack character, after they sold off most of the other Harvey Comics characters, they started Sad Sack up again in the 1990s with issue 288 and published a few more issues. But we'll get to that. So the first Sad Sack series, in 1949, was also a pantomime strip. It was in color, but it was a pantomime strip. And by this time, Sad Sack had left the army. After World War II, he became a civilian. So these strips were not about army adventures. They were about, daily things that anybody could go through. And Sad Sack just became sort of like an everyman. but you know, he'd always try to do something and things would go wrong for him. So this is what the strips would look like in the first issues of Sad Sack. Again, pantomime, so no words, but they're a lot of fun. Most of them are one-page strips. Well, actually, no. Looking at this, most of them are two-page strips, but some are one-page strips as well, like these ones. He'd try to help out somebody, and somehow it would go wrong. He'd end up getting arrested a lot of the time. And they're just fun adventures. So, the early issues of Sad Sack are very expensive. I don't have any of them. I used to have a copy of number 7. I don't have it anymore. When I was a kid, I had a very large Sad Sack collection. But I sold off most of those, and I just have a pile now of Sad Sack comics about this big, which I absolutely love. I wish I had more, but I'm going to show them to you today. So, if you want to find the first 2 issues of Sad Sack, you're going to have a hard time doing it. You're going to have to pay a lot of money if you want to do that, and I don't have money for that. Perhaps you don't either. So, I would suggest looking for this comic. If you want to get a taste of what Sad Sack was like at the beginning, look for Harvey Collector's Comics number 16, which is the last issue of Harvey Collector's Comics. This was a comic devoted to reprinting the first issues of different series of Harvey comics, like especially Richie Rich and and Casper and stuff like that. At this point, though, in Harvey Comics history, they were printing like a whole plethora of Richie Rich comics. I think there were over 30 different Richie Rich titles on the stands at one time. So they were trying to do what Archie did and just base their whole foundation basically on Richie Rich, or they were moving that way when they went out of business in '82. Of course, they did come back a few years later, but they diversified a bit more as they had earlier. But these are the covers of the first 2 issues of Sad Sack. There's number 1 on the, number 1 is this one here, and number 2 is this one here. Okay, so if you want to get a taste of what those are like, there's number 1, a bigger picture of it. This reprints a large portion of the first 2 issues of Sad Sack. It doesn't reprint everything, but this is a thicker issue of a comic, and there's quite a bit in here. I think there's about 52 pages in this comic, and it's great. When I got this as a kid, I was just over the moon, because I was like, whoa, I get to see like the original Sad Sack. But I was all confused because I was like, this is so much different than the Sad Sack in the comics later on. No words, and he's not in the army. But it's really neat stuff. So, this Sad Sack, the civilian Sad Sack, was not a big success. Harvey did publish over 20 issues of it, of Sad Sack as a civilian. But the sales numbers weren't quite what they wanted. And someone got the idea that perhaps they should put Sad Sack back into the army like he was in World War II. And they said maybe that will increase the sales. So they proudly put on the cover of the comics when he went back in World War II. They put at the top, "Back in the Army Again." And it was a huge hit. It was a huge hit. People loved to see Sad Sack in the army. That's how they wanted to see him. There might have been a lot of veterans that were buying the comic. Kids thought it was more exciting to see him in the army. So that's where he stayed. He stayed in the army, like forever after that, pretty much. Although there were some exceptions, which we'll probably get to if I remember later on. So with issue number 20-something, I can't remember which one it was right now, but he went back into the army. It became a big seller. And eventually, Sad Sack's, with Harvey Comics, spawned a whole series of spin-offs, just like Richie Rich and Casper the Friendly Ghost, Wendy the Good Little Witch, all those comics. So we're gonna talk about those spin-offs. The first one, well, actually, we don't need to do them in order. I'll just talk about them as they come up in my collection piles here. So before I get to that, though, here's a copy of Maisie. This is not a Sad Sack comic. This is a Harvey Comics Archie comic type comic. Maisie, which was later called Maisie and Her Boyfriends. And yeah, it's like Archie Comics Adventures. This is a coverless copy. I sent a copy to a friend that had a cover on it, which was a very nice copy. This is the only other copy I have. It was only 49 cents because it has no cover. Usually it'd be a lot more money than that because, you know, these are hard to find. They're collectible. But yeah, I just thought I'd show you that because it's with my Harvey comic. I got all my Harvey comics together, mostly Sad Sacks though. So this was number 18 of Maisie, coverless copy. Oops. Now, let's look at one of my favorite spin-offs of Sad Sack, which was the Sad Sack Laugh Special. Now, the Sad Sack Laugh Special ran for 93 issues from 1958 to 1977. So this is number 7. This is a very early issue of the Sad Sack Laugh Special. And I will tell you that these early special Sad Sack comics are really great. They're even better than the later ones. This is probably, well, being number 7, this will be from the early 60s. Very early 60s. But these comics are thick. I mean, look at that. There's a spine that has the title on it. And this cost $6, this comic. It cost me $6. But I thought, hey, it's worth it, you know. Because this is amazing stuff. Like, I'm just looking at it. You probably want to look at it, but there's so many pages in this, and there's hardly any ads at all in these earlier ones. Later on, Harvey started doing a lot more ads. But wow, again, another flip through. We'll hear it this way. And you get so many fun Sad Sack stories in this. It's just incredible. What a great comic book this is. And you get different artists drawing Sad Sack. Because Harvey had, this is Sadie Sack, his sister. She has her own stories. It's another thing, you don't just get Sad Sack stories. You get, like, stories of his other family members and his friends. Now, I do want to mention, well, this is a beautiful comic book. Just beautiful. So, I mean, it's fun to buy all Sad Sack comics if you can find any. But the early ones, oh, especially, you get so much for your money with these earlier ones. So I want to list off the cartoonists who worked on Sad Sack. So George Baker was doing it by himself until the mid-1950s, and Harvey Comics brought in a fellow called Paul McCarthy to start drawing Sad Sack stories. Now, I believe, I'm not absolutely certain, because they don't credit the artists or writers, but I believe this is Paul McCarthy artwork. I could be wrong. So he did a lot of the earlier ones in the 50s. Probably into the 60s. I don't know if this is a reprint or an original. I mean, the book is an original, but I don't know if that story was reprinted from an earlier one or not. And another fellow they had, and I know this is his artwork, this is Fred Rhodes. Fred Rhodes did probably more Sad Sack stories other than George Baker in the Sad Sack comics, and he had my favorite style. He had the cleanest style. But I've grown to love all the styles in this, though. This one was really neat because it had a story that was atypical for Sad Sack, where Sad Sack was putting together a book of an enlisted man's handbook of, you know, things to look out for in the army and I guess, women that you should date and ones that you should avoid. And well, that's mostly what it's about, actually. It looks like it's about dating, stuff like that, which is, not a typical sad sack story, so that was really interesting. Now we have an early Fred Rhodes story here. So these are just beautiful. Bright colors, and like there's barely an ad in this whole comic. And this must be about 85 pages, this comic book. Amazing. And back then, when it came out in the early 60s, it was 35 cents. Imagine that. Oh, before we... Oh, I want to tell you the other cartoonist, too. So, there's Jack O'Brien. I always recognize his art. He did a bunch of Sad Sack stories. He also was the editor of one of my favorite humor magazines from the 1950s. At one point, he was the editor, called This Magazine is Crazy. He may have been the editor for all the issues under that title. I'm not sure, because some of them didn't credit an editor. But that was a great humor magazine, too. And then he went on to do Sad Sack stories. And then there was a guy named Joe Dennett who did some stories. There was also Warren Kramer and Ken Selig, who also did Sad Sack stories. I don't recognize their art as much, differentiating from the other artwork, but Wikipedia says they did artwork as well in Sad Sack. Okay, so now on a lot of Sad Sack issues, they'll list the cast of characters on the side. So you see Sad Sack, the Sarge. The Sarge is always his primary nemesis. The Sarge is always ordering him around, telling him to do stuff, and kicking him, and just being a jerk to him, basically. But sometimes he gets back at him. And then there's Old Sod Sack, who's his dad. He runs a moonshine still up in the hills, making illegal alcohol, stuff like that. And he has a... what would be what they call stereotypical hillbilly family is what they would call it, and that's Sad Sack's family. So sometimes you see adventures with them. Cookie, he's the chef at the army camp, and you imagine a lot of times they don't like his food very much, And Waldo, who eventually became more famous as Sad Sack's best friend, Slabinski. They changed his name from Waldo to Slabinski. A lot of people don't know about that. So it's pretty neat to get an old comic like this that actually still has him as Waldo. The logo for Sad Sack Laugh Special was cool because they have all these faces in the laugh there, as you see, and they're Sad Sack. And Hi-Fi Tweeter is the guy with the long cigarette holder type thing. He's another one of Sad Sack's best friends. And the giant size Harvey comic. So that's a big Harvey comic when it says giant size on it like that. Okay, so Sad Sack Laugh Special are some of my favorite issues of Sad Sack. I like the title a lot. I like the logo. I like these big earlier issues. And all the issues are fun. The later issues that are smaller are tons of fun as well. So I definitely recommend the 93 issues of Sad Sack Laugh Special if you can track those down. So another spin-off of Sad Sack was called Sad Sack's Army Life Parade. Now this started off as there was an umbrella title Harvey Comics published called Harvey Hits. Harvey Hits would do one-shots, which would turn into many more shots, actually, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like, if they were popular, they'd keep publishing them. But of titles that didn't have their own title at the time, if that makes any sense to you. So they'd have all different things, like Herman and Catnip, Richie Rich, Casper, and many, many Sad Sack ones. So Sad Sack's Army Life started off as one of the alternating titles under the Harvey Hits banner. And then it was so popular that it got its own title. And it lasted for 58 issues, I believe. Let me check here. 57 issues from 1963 until 1975. But then the title of it changed to Sad Sack's Army Life Today, which was almost the same. It just took off Parade and put Today in its place. And that went for another 4 issues, up to issue 61. And that was that ended in 1976. So really, it's the same title. They just changed one word in it. So yeah, if you have a copy of Sad Sack's Army Life Today, that's one of the final issues of Sad Sack's Army Life Parade. This is an early issue of Sad Sack's Army Life Parade. Number 7, just like Sad Sack Laugh Special. This is also a giant size Harvey comic, so it's got like a ton of pages again. Hardly any ads because it's an earlier one. And it's just absolutely fantastic. Now you'll see on the cover here, the General is another character. And he's in the Sad Sack a lot. He always walks around with his cigarette, and he's always pampered, and he's really disconnected with the enlisted man's life. But he comes around, he provides some very interesting stories in Sad Sack. And now a slob is Slob Slabinski in this one, you can see. So he didn't stay Waldo for too long. Alright. This one was $8. Wow. I usually don't pay that much for a comic book. I usually get them in 3 for $1 bins, but I didn't have many Sad Sacks left, and I really wanted to get anything I could find, so I splurged a bit on some of these Sad Sacks. Actually, I got some of these on a 50% off sale as well, actually. So I would have paid $4 for that, and this one like $3.50 for this one, because I was getting them 50% off. Okay, so another Sad Sack spin-off was Sad Sack World, which ran from 1964 to the mid-70s or so. And I believe, it doesn't say, but I believe there were 46 issues of Sad Sack World. So this is an early issue, another giant-size Harvey comic. Now we see another character, Mutsy. Mutsy was Sad Sack's dog, who would talk sometimes. He was called Sad Sack's Mutsy the Talking Dog. He had his own title in Harvey Hits as well. I don't think I have any copies of it, but he didn't get his own title, but he had, you see what I mean, his own title within Harvey Hits, right? But he didn't get his own official title, though. But there were quite a few copies or issues of Sad Sack's Mutsy within Harvey Hits, though. Then we have Sadie Sack, who's Sad Sack's sister. She also, well, no, actually, I'll get to that later. But anyway, Sad Sack World. That's what it looks like. $6, so I would have paid $3 for that one. Now, here's something a lot of Sad Sack fans might not realize. Just as, you know, there was Richie Rich, Wendy, the Good Little Witch, Casper, they're all kids, right? So Harvey Comics decided to try a kid version of Sad Sack. And they called it Little Sad Sack. So this one is really cool, too, because this is not in the Army. This is an exception. I was telling you there were some exceptions at the beginning of this video. So you get to see what Sad Sack's life was as a little boy. And that's really funny, you know, it's really fascinating. It's just unique to see something different like that. And I believe that all these stories were drawn by Fred Rhodes. By the way, all these covers are done by George Baker, at least until he passed away in 1975. He kept doing all the covers for Sad Sack. He did so many covers because there's so many different titles. So Little Sad Sack started off as a title in Harvey Hits as well, and he was popular enough to get his own title, but it didn't last too long. It lasted for 19 issues. That's not bad, 19 issues, from 1964 until 1967. So in this comic, you'll meet Sad Sack's parents as well. And they're really charming stories, I have to say. They're just really charming stories. So I definitely recommend seeking out Little Sad Sack as well. They're hard to find. The first spin-off of Sad Sack was Sad Sack and the Sarge, which lasted for 155 issues from 1957, I think? 1955. No, 1957. Oh, it wasn't the first spin-off. Okay, so this was actually the second spin-off of Sad Sack. That lasted beyond one issue, that is. There was a Sad Sack comic called Sad Sack Goes Home in 1951, which was a one-shot. But there was another title, which I'll show you later, which was the first spin-off that lasted for a while. But the second spin-off was Sad Sack and the Sarge. Started in 1957, and it lasted until 1982, 155 issues. This is an earlier issue. It's number 16, I think that says. Now, when you have a Harvey comic and you see this stamp in the upper left corner, what looks like a stamp with the title and a character, you'll know you have a Harvey comic from the 1950s, because only in the 1950s did they use that on their covers, that stamp motif, which I thought was really cool. I really like that a lot. Come 1960, they changed that, and they didn't use the stamp anymore. And they just started using the rounder logo and the jester that would be popping, or the jack-in-the-box that would be popping out here. I was like the Harvey Comics mascot for a while. So Sad Sack and the Sarge, great title. Obviously, the second most successful title in the Sad Sack line, because it lasted for the second most issues after Sad Sack. So yeah, it's Sad Sack's Adventures with Sarge, with the Sergeant. Here's another copy of Little Sad Sack. There you go. Oh, and this is not Sad Sack, but this is Bunny. Bunny is a really fun Harvey comic under the Harvey Teen line, which was a short-lived line of comics they had that they wanted to appeal to teens. Bunny was another Archie-type comic, really. But it had its own personality to it. And it was funny that Harvey was, like, it says she's hip, she's mod, she's boss. This was the 1960s. So you get really kind of psychedelic covers. You know, lots of covers, lots of colors and things going on. She's in a bullfight here in this one. They got great covers, and they're fun stories. Really fun stories. Most of the issues of Bunny are giant size, so they're big comics too. These are really collectible and worth seeking. They're not easy to find now. There were about 21 issues of Bunny, I believe. And I sent some to a friend of mine, but this is the one, a very good friend, and this is one that I have left. This is the only one I have left, actually, of Bunny comics, but it's really neat. So I do recommend that you look for these as well, if you can find them. They also featured the adventures of a superhero character, which is a really bizarre superhero character called Fruit Man, who had the ability, he was a grocer, and he had the ability to turn himself into pieces of fruit and attack people as pieces of fruit. Very strange. But this was the 60s, and the writers were trying really hard to fit in with the youth culture of the time and saying, what's some wild, wacky thing that the kids would be into today? Another thing that's funny about Bunny is the writers made up some words. Like one word they made up was zoovie. So instead of saying groovy all the time, they'd say zoovie. And they're hoping, I guess, that would catch on with the kids, say, wow, that's real zoovie. So that was kind of neat. There's lots of puns in this comic, plays on words, you know. But anyway, that's a fun comic. But back to Sad Sack. I think that's the only other non-Sad Sack one I've gotten here. So we'll just be talking about Sad Sack for the rest. But Sad Sack's Funny Friends was the first spin-off from the Sad Sack series before Sad Sack and the Sarge. So I was telling you there was another one, and this was the first one, Sad Sack's Funny Friends. When I was a kid, I couldn't find any issues of this title, which was surprising because it lasted from 1955 until 1969 for 75 issues, and yet it was one of the hardest spin-offs to find of Sad Sack, at least for me. And I always wanted to find it. So if you can find issues of this, you know, congratulations, because it's probably still hard to find. The neat thing about Sad Sack's Funny Friends is that each issue would feature a different friend of Sad Sack. The Sarge, who I don't know if I'd call him a friend, but I guess I could, right? I guess we could, because sometimes they get along. Not often, but the Sarge was featured in quite a few of these issues before he got his own title, Sad Sack and the Sarge. So this is a Sarge issue. Sadie Sack, his sister, was featured in her own issues of Sad Sack's Funny Friends. So was Hi-Fi Tweeter, had a couple of issues. He didn't have too many, but he had a few issues all to himself, which I've never been able to track down. And the General pretty much took over the comic in the later issues. Every issue was devoted to the General. So that's a funny comic. General never did get his own title outside of Sad Sack's Funny Friends. Here's another issue of Sad Sack Laugh Special. This is number 20-something. 23, it looks like. Another giant size. They also used this picture of Sad Sack with a drum, with Mutzi coming out of the drum on a lot of the covers. I think the 100th issue of Sad Sack had a cover with Sad Sack and his drum. I've never owned it, but I seem to remember it had a drum cover on the 100th issue. Sad Sack Laugh Special number 26. Sad Sack World number 27. I know you're getting a glare here from the plastic covering, but yeah, I don't want to take them all out right now. I think you're getting a pretty good look though at these. Sad Sack and the Sarge number 29. There's a note on here from the store I bought it at where it says, well, it just says what year it's from. And that the cover is loose. So yeah, this wasn't quite as much money as some other ones would be. Sad Sack's Army Life Parade number 47. This was on the 70s. Now this cover is ripped. You could see part of the cover's missing. So that one's not in the greatest shape, to say the least. Now we have Sad Sack's Army Life Parade 51. I love this cover. I'm a big fan of forests and trees in life. I just like greenery. And I like it in comic books as well. I like it on covers and in comic books. So I really like this cover a lot. See Sad Sack chopping down the tree, but he's not doing it the right way. He's staying in the tree. Pretty sure it's going to fall on him if he does. That's a bad idea. 52 pages at this point, so before it was 80-something pages, I think. Now it's gone down to 52 pages in the early 70s. And then it goes to even less pages. But still lots of fun. Sad Sack's Army Life Parade number 53. And Sad Sack's Funny Friend the General. So this is one of the Funny Friends the General issues, but it has no cover. So, yeah, this is just a 49-cent comic. Sad Sack's Army Life Parade number 55. I like this cover too. I really love the colors that pop out on the Harvey comics. They really catch your attention. This is just beautiful. I just love the coloring. I love it. I love the logo, the blue and the red and the white background, and the colors in the George Baker cover. Very nice. We have another coverless Sad Sack. This is Sad Sack's Funny Friend, the Sarge. Well, this is Sad Sack and the Sarge. But this is probably a reprint from a Funny Friends comic that featured the Sarge, because it says that at the top there. I could never tell when I read the Sad Sack comics what was a reprint and what was new, because they mix new stories with reprints. And there are just so many stories. Oh, this is a beautiful, beautiful issue. Sad Sack Laugh Special number 65. 52-page special from the 70s. Just beautiful. Oh, look at that cover. That is gorgeous. And these are so much fun to read. I mean, they're kids' comics, but as an adult, you know, if you have nostalgia for this, it's so much fun. And they're fun anyway, you know. They're breezy reads. They're fun little stories. And, you know, it's not so subtle, but a lot of these stories are critical of army life, of what it's like for soldiers in the army. You know, the rough life they live. And there's some subtle anti-war stories in here too, which are pretty good. I'm sure that I saw, but I mean, it's all, you know, it's not anti-military, it's pro-military, it's respecting military people, especially the soldiers. And soldiers loved Sad Sack. I think this was a big seller on army bases, you know. And I mean, if I was a soldier, I'd love Sad Sack. I'm not a soldier and I love Sad Sack. Obviously, you don't have to be a soldier, but I'm saying that Sad Sack can appeal to anybody. Still, the Sad Sack Facebook group will make posts sometimes for a Memorial Day or Veterans Day, and, you know, saluting the soldiers. So there's always been, you know, a real respect for the soldiers that made Sad Sack popular. And of course, George Baker was a soldier, not a Sad Sack, was a soldier himself. So it's a great comic. It's a nice comic. It's a good family comic. So I keep showing you that cover because I just love that issue so much. That's just beautiful. Sad Sack Laugh Special number 76. I know I had this one as a kid. This isn't the copy I had as a kid. I rebought it, but this was an easier one to find, this issue. I'm finding that Sad Sack comics are increasingly difficult to find now, though. I rarely see them anymore at my comic store downtown or any other comic store downtown. Sad Sack Laugh Special 91. So this is one of the final issues. I believe we said there were 93 issues, or was it 94, of Sad Sack Laugh Special? I know I mentioned it earlier in the video. Harvey changed its logo in the mid-70s to a Harvey World logo, which is like a world, as you see. They started having more ads. The comics were shorter, had more ads in them around this time. Now this one's a curious one on Tom's Comic Curios here, because this is an issue of Harvey Hits magazine, which I told you about, was their umbrella title where they had all different, titles within it. And it's called G.I. Junior. So this is not actually a Sad Sack comic, but it's pretty close to it, because it's done by Jack O'Brien, one of the Sad Sack artists. I think that's Jack who did this. It could be Fred Rhodes. Could be Fred Rhodes, actually. So, Jack O'Brien cover. That's his signature there. Okay. So I guess it's a Jack O'Brien comic. There was another comic, which is a Fred Rhodes comic called Gabby Gob, which was like a Sad Sack. It was also in Harvey Hits. He was in the Navy, and he was like a Sad Sack character, but he wasn't Sad Sack. I don't have any of those. But G.I. Juniors is about kids in the Army, which is kind of weird. I guess they're cadets, which makes more sense. So that, okay, it does make sense, I guess, because there are cadets. But this issue is really neat, because if you look down here, their sergeant here, I think he's a sergeant because of his emblem. I'm not sure. Has got a whole bunch of Harvey comics. He's got Casper's Ghostland, Richie Rich Millions. He's got Sad Sack Last Special. So this entire issue is a story about the kids collecting Harvey comics, and I think someone steals the comics, if I remember correctly, and they have to figure out where they went. So it's weird. I've never seen a Harvey comic about Harvey comics before, where the characters are actually collecting and reading Harvey comics. And I know Sad Sack is one of their favorite comics. So this is really cool. If you're a Sad Sack fan, this is something you probably would not know about. So I'm telling you about this right now. This is an issue you want to track down of G.I. Juniors, which is actually Harvey Hits. So you have to look for Harvey Hits if you're looking for it online. And I think it's issue like 112. I think that says it's about 112 from the 60s. I was so glad to find a copy of this downtown. Very fortunate to find this. There is someone uploaded this on YouTube. You can read some Sad Sacks on YouTube where they'll show each page at a time. You can read the entire comics. And this is also up there. So you can find this on YouTube if you look up G.I. Juniors, or at least it was there like a year ago or so. So if you want to read that story for yourself. Sad Sack and the Sarge, number 126. This one is not in plastic. The shape isn't as good, but it's neat. And by this time, George Baker had passed away, and so Fred Rhodes was doing the covers for the Sad Sack comics. This was in the later 70s. Now, some people have complained that Sad Sack had ads right when you open up the comic, or Harvey Comics had ads. This is something they started doing later on, just, when they had more ads in the comic, as soon as you open it, you see an ad. I can understand why some people wouldn't like that. They'd like to see the story right away. I always loved these ads for Harvey Comics, within Harvey Comics, because they show you pictures of all the latest issues that were out, and I think that was so much fun. See all the covers, and I dream about finding them. So, Sad Sack and the Sarge. I realized, what's really funny is that this entire time I've been showing you my Sad Sack collection, I haven't shown you a single issue of the Flagship Title Sad Sack. That was just Sad Sack. I've just been showing you spin-offs the entire time. Because the funny thing is I don't have as many titles of just Sad Sack. Which, that's the way it goes. I've been able to find more of the spin-offs, which is pretty weird. Anyway, you get the idea. There's a few more pages. Fun comics to read. The next one I have, though, is a copy, finally, of Sad Sack itself. This is Sad Sack 171. I think this is from the 60s. Pretty sure about that. Yeah, this has got to be from the 60s. I can just tell by looking at it. Beautiful. Just beautiful. The Sad Sack titles are not... They don't have as many pages. There was a period, I believe, in the early 70s where they did have more pages, but it was a brief period. Here's another issue of Sad Sack. So finally we're seeing some of these now. Sad Sack 194. Sad Sack number 254. Now this would be in the 70s again now, you can see, with a Fred Rhodes cover. And the Harvey World logo. Love these covers, just love them. This one's in beautiful shape. Sad Sack 264. This would be about 1979. Sack's distracted there. He's seeing a pretty whack, and he gets distracted. That's what they called the women in the army. Back then, WACS, which I believe stood for Women's Auxiliary Corps, maybe? I'm just guessing. I don't really know what it stands for. What that title, what WAC stands for. Somebody will know, and somebody will mention it in the comments, I'm sure. Sad Sack and the Sarge, 138. With a pink cover, very nice pink cover. This would also be around 1979. This one I know is 1979 because I remember. Sad Sack 266. So maybe that other one was 78. He's dressing up. He's going to a masquerade party as the general. Unfortunately, he's running into the general, and the general's not going to be amused by his get-up there. Always says at the title of Sad Sack, it usually says, "Loved by Millions." Now, Sad Sack and the Sarge 147. So this is from the 80s, the early 80s, about 1981. Fascinating cover. This is one of the later issues of Sad Sack and the Sarge. There's only 155 issues of it, so 147 will be near the end. Now, this looks like a George Baker cover. So if it is, then that means that they found some unused George Baker covers and started to use them in the early 80s, because some of the covers started to look like this again. Either that or it's someone imitating George Baker. Very cool. Very cool. And then the last issue of Sad Sack, for quite a long time, was 287, published in cover date October 1982, I believe. Yes. And I have read more than once that this issue is hard to find of Sad Sack because it had low distribution. So if you find a copy of this, it might cost you more money. This one cost me more money, I remember. But yeah, Sad Sack 287 from 1982. So at this point, Harvey Comics went out of business. It came back a few years later, like I said, but they didn't bring Sad Sack back. They did publish one issue of Harvey Comics Spotlight, the first issue, called which was devoted to Sad Sack, which is a great issue. I also sent that to a friend, and so I can't show it to you right now. But it is a fantastic issue of Sad Sack, or Harvey Comics Spotlight, from 1987, I believe it was. And I urge you to track down that issue. That's a lot of fun. They also licensed Sad Sack out in the late 80s to Blackthorn Publishing, which we talked about in Laugh-In Gas video. And they published Sad Sack Flip Book, which I also sent to a friend, which was half Sad Sack and half Stumble the Giant. And they also published a 3D Sad Sack issue as well, because as I said in the Laugh-In Gas issue, they were known for publishing 3D comics as well. So that was interesting that they licensed out Sad Sack Harvey at that time. And then Sad Sack, there wasn't much Sad Sack beyond that in the late 80s, if anything. But before I get to the final Sad Sack issues, I do want to mention there were a few more spin-offs of Sad Sack that I don't have copies of. I used to have copies when I was a kid, but I don't have them now. There was one called Sad Sack Navy Gobs and Gals. It lasts for 8 issues. Started in 1972. In 72, Harvey Comics tried to reinvigorate the Sad Sack line by introducing some new Sad Sack spin-offs. So in the Sad Sack Navy title, he was in the Navy, which was kind of surprising because he'd always been in the Army. But yeah, he was in the Navy in this comic, so it's interesting just for that curiosity factor. And they had another title called Sad Sack with Sarge and Sadie, which doesn't look like it's listed here actually on Wikipedia. I'm not seeing it. But there was one called Sad Sack with Sarge and Sadie, which so the stories focus a lot on Sadie Sack, his sister, and the Sarge in that one. And I believe that lasts for 8 issues as well. And then there was one called Sad Sack USA, which is really interesting, which lasted for 7 issues. But one more issue was published in 1974, about a year after the previous last issue. So that would have been like number 8. And it was called Sad Sack USA Vacation. This is pretty much the same title. They just put a vacation on the end of it. And Sad Sack USA was interesting because in each issue of that comic, Sad Sack would go to a different state. He'd explore a different state. And sometimes the governor of that state would have a letter printed in the Sad Sack USA issue talking about how happy he was that Sad Sack had gone to his state. He was being featured his state was being featured in the comic book, and telling everybody you should come and visit, And the comic book was mostly a tourist attraction, like a travelogue for each state, almost like propaganda for each state, because Sad Sack would go and visit the different sites in the state and bungle around and stuff. It was kind of weird in a way, but it was neat though. It was neat. I mean, if you want to know about the different attractions in different U.S. states, and it's a good way to do it with Sad Sack, I would assume, So that was an interesting comic. And there was also one other one in 1974, which only lasted for 1 issue, called Sad Sack Fun Around the World, which I might have had a copy of one time. I think I did. But in that comic, he visited Great Britain. They were going to have him visit a different country in every comic, like he did the States in Sad Sack USA, but unfortunately, Sad Sack Fun Around the World only lasted for 1 issue. So Great Britain was the only country he visited. And I believe that was it for the Sad Sack spin-offs. So in the early 90s, Lauren Harvey retained the right. They had sold all their rights to their characters. I guess they sold Harvey Comics off pretty much, because Harvey Comics kept going. And for a while, into the 90s, when it came back, after the hiatus I was talking about, they published all sorts. They started publishing Back to the Future comics a whole bunch of New Kids on the Block comics, which is really funny. They were milking that for all it was worth while the New Kids were popular, but doing a whole bunch of spin-offs of them. Richie Rich, Casper, Wendy, Little Lotta, all of these characters. And like I said, new franchises, like I mentioned a few already, but I think they did Monster in My Pocket. They did, I lost it now. Beetlejuice. They did Beetlejuice comics. They started doing Felix the Cat comics again. They had published Felix back in the 50s. And if you're into Harvey comics are lots of fun. They're great, wholesome kids comics. You can look for those. But the original Harvey brothers, the original Harvey family, I should say, retained the rights to Sad Sack and Black Cat. Black Cat was the first female superhero, I believe, before Wonder Woman. Now don't quote me on it. Might not have been the absolute first female superhero, but she might have been, though. I think I've heard that she was. She's like in the early 40s. And that comic, they also retained the rights to Black Cat, that character. So they started publishing reprints of Sad Sack comics and Black Cat comics and some others in the 90s, here and there. They seemed to have a little trouble getting them out, though, because they were very sporadic in the publishing schedule. So you see one here and there. They'd always be soliciting more copies in Diamond Comics distribution catalogs and previews and Amazing Heroes, Advanced Comics, publications like that. And a lot of times they wouldn't come out, or they'd be much delayed. They did advertise a comic called Sad Sack, the newspaper strip, in the 90s for the first time, about 94 or so, which they said was going to be coming out, which I would love to have a copy of, but it was never published. So that was going to reprint the Sad Sack newspaper strip from the 40s and 50s. There have been times over the last couple of decades where the Harvey family has said that they're going to publish that newspaper strip comic, but it never comes out, though. It's never come out yet. But I think, like I said, you can see some copies of it on their Facebook group, some of the newspaper strips. But anyway, Sad Sack was started again by the Harvey family under the Recollections banner. And these comics are probably the hardest Sad Sacks to find. Low distribution. And they're really fun. They're really great. I love them. And so this was the return issue of Sad Sack. They continued the numbering from where they left off. So Sad Sack 288. This came out in 1992. And it was in color at the beginning, which I much prefer Sad Sack in color. If you watch my channel here, I collect primarily black and white comics. I love black and white independent comics, but Sad Sack looks so much better in color, though. Because you like to have those colorful Harvey comics, Although I still love the black and white issues as well. These have nice white pages because this is not as old as the other Sad Sacks. It's in very good condition. So if you can track these down, then you've got something special on your hands, in my opinion. I mean, they're all special, all the Sad Sacks, but these are hard to find. So there you go, Sad Sack 288. There's a copy of it right there. Which was followed up by Sad Sack 289. '50th anniversary issue. I believe that would be 50 years from the original Sad Sack in Yank. This was also in color. This is Jack O'Brien's artwork. So when you see Sad Sack look like this, it's a Jack O'Brien story. Jack O'Brien would often take Sad Sack on adventures that were outside of his norm, like he's in Egypt in this one. Sometimes he'd meet like Merlin the wizard or witches under the sea. You know, things like that. And his stories would often continue. Like there'd be a part 1, and later on in the comic there'd be a part 2. So there'd be these epic story adventures. Then we have, this is a different artist. This is like a 50s story. This could be the Paul McCarthy's art. I'm not sure though. This is about Sad Sack's dog, Mutzi. Then you have some Fred Rhodes stories. So you see old Sad Sack's dad, chasing people, well, chasing a bear away with a shotgun there. Sadie Sack, Sad Sack's sister. That's a Jack O'Brien one over here, actually. I could tell. Another Fred Rhodes one-pager here. And then another one that looks like the Paul McCarthy, I think. I'm not sure, though. I'm not sure. Man, I don't know. It could be like Joe Dennett or somebody. I'm not really sure. It's too bad they don't give you credits. But Archie Comics didn't give credits for a long, long time either. I assume they did later on, but I'm not sure. So yeah, so there's 289 of Sad Sack. And then we have Sad Sack at Home for the Holidays, number 1. So this was another, this only lasted for 1 issue. This was a one-shot. But this is another fun, hard-to-find issue of Sad Sack, published in the 90s by the Harvey family. It has a great Christmas cover and a 1993 Sad Sack centerfold calendar. So this would have come out in December of 92. Funny thing about it, though, is there are no Christmas stories in it. I don't know if Sad Sack ever had any Christmas stories. I do know there was an issue of Sad Sack and the Sarge with a Halloween cover, which was absolutely fantastic. I wish I had a copy of it. I don't have it any longer, though. I sold it. But it actually had Halloween stories in it, which I thought was so cool. But this one, yeah, even though it's a Christmas issue, there's no Christmas stories in it, which is a little weird. But they are winter-themed, some of them, as you can see. He's doing guard duty in the snow. Not fun. Not fun for Sad Sack. And he gets frozen, like literally frozen in that story. So a few winter-themed stories, and then there's just the regular types of Sad Sack stories. And we even, see, you get stories like from the entire history of Sad Sack, 50s, 60s, 70s, reprinted in this. You even get an old Sad Sack Pantomime strip from the original Sad Sack comic. Before he was in the army again. And that is a Christmas story, actually. No, I see that. And you see, it even says down here, look out for Sad Sack the newspaper strip number 1 on sale soon, but it never came out. Newspaper strip would have been fun to read too, like I said. Now, there was a hiatus again, and then with Sad Sack 290, they did something different. They said this was the first of 10 all-new issues of Sad Sack. So, they switched to black and white and lowered the price. And these were new stories, never printed, Fred Rhodes stories. And the weird thing about these is that they introduced a whole bunch of new characters in the Sad Sack universe. Like a crazy amount of characters. So you see a bunch of them here. There was Swinger Sack, who is like a 70s type swinger guy. Supposed to be one of Sad Sack's cousins. You see, there he is with Sad Sack. These stories are weird, by the way. Um, Ski Sack up there. Sweetie Sack, which is a movie star cousin of Sad Sack, kind of like a Bridget Bardot character there. Um, what does that say? Starlet Sack. So another movie star cousin of Sack up here. I don't. Very similar to Sweetie Sack, I would assume. Knapsack, who's his younger cousin here. Knapsack. That's pretty funny. Sear Sack, Swifty Sack, Potato Sack, Wisecracker Sack, maybe? I don't know, it's a parrot. Sky Sack, Knave Sack, Swampy Sack, so, and Sunbeam Sack. So they were going to introduce this whole family of Sad Sack characters. It's really bizarre. And it makes me wonder, like, were these stories, I assume they weren't new from the 90s. I assume that they were on-printed stories from the 70s by Fred Rhodes. So it makes me wonder if they were going to create another Sad Sack title called Sad Sack's Family or something in the 70s that just never got printed. And they just had the stories laying around. I don't know. That's just me speculating. Because I don't know why these stories weren't printed and why there's so many different family members. It'd be interesting to know what the story behind those is. So they're going to print all these in 10 new issues. So that was the first one. The second one was this one, number 2 of all new issues, 291. They also had just the regular Sad Sack stories, too. New stories that weren't printed of Sad Sack. Here's a Knapsack story. Potato Sack story. And his army of spuds. And Knave Sack, Sad Sack. So it'd be Sad Sack back in medieval times. They printed one of those Knave Sad Sack stories in a Black Cat comic, the last Black Cat comic that has been published, back around 95 or so. So, this was the last issue that came out. They were supposed to be 10 of them, and they did solicit a bunch of them, but they just never came out. This was the last issue that came out for about 10 years or so. This came out in 94, I believe. And then in 2004 or so, there was one more issue of Sad Sack, which I have, but I have it downstairs, so I'm not going to show it to you right now. You can look it up. It's Sad Sack 292, and it's got to be one of the rarest issues of Sad Sack there are. As I said, I do have a copy of it, and it's highly irregular. It's highly unusual because it is a softcover book, a big softcover book, like bigger than a comic book, bigger than a graphic novel, well, than a smaller graphic novel, I guess. And it's just, it's in black and white, and it's got a lot of pages, too. But it's a softcover book, but it's Sad Sack 292, which is so strange to me. There aren't many copies of it around, but it's a very interesting curiosity if you can find a copy of it. I don't know where you'd find it. So I just want to tell you about that. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this look at Sad Sack and all his funny friends and all the different Sad Sack titles and the whole history of Sad Sack. So leave me comments, leave me nice comments, you know, in the comment section, because I love reading the comments. I love it when people are interested in, you know, what I have to talk about. and these comics. And I hope you enjoyed this video very much. And I'll see you all next time.